This is Studio 809.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Outdoors with Hiking Bob podcast. I am your host, Hiking Bob Falcone, and you can find me on my website at hikingbob.com, where there's links to my social media, my other podcasts, my photography website. Also, you can drop me a line and leave me a note and tell me if there's something you want to hear discussed or a guest you'd like to hear us have on the podcast or anything like that. You can do all that at hikingbob.com. Today I'm flying solo. My podcast co-host Kevin Wild Westendorf was scheduled to be here, but he has unfortunately been detained. So I'm just going to fly solo today and hope you can endure listening to me. In any case, a couple things I wanted to catch up with you all on. And I don't know if I mentioned this in previous podcasts. I couldn't see that I did, but one thing that's been on my bucket list for a long time is going to, as you know, I've been traveling to different places, different places. I've been to the Galapagos, all this stuff since I retired. Been to Hawaii, been to Yosemite, been to Yellowstone, been to a lot of different places. More trips coming up in the next couple of months. But one of the places I've been wanting to go to is Iceland. Been on my bucket list for a while. Would love to see Iceland, but it's been an expensive trip to plan, so I just haven't been able to do it. Well, things kind of turned around in my favor, where National Geographic has a trip going there, and not for another year or so. It's going to be more than a year, but with discounts and incentives and stuff like that, the price got to be very much within my price range. So I'm excited to say that I will be going to Iceland in May of 2025. So, and it'll be right after Memorial Day. So I'll be going to Iceland right after Memorial Day in 2025. So I'm real excited about that. I can't wait to go. The photographs I'll be able to get from there, I'm just excited thinking about them, and I'm itching to go, even though it's been a year, or it's going to be more than a year before it happens. But that's okay. The idea of waiting that long was, well, be honest with your finances. It's going to take me that long to save up to pay the full balance on the trip. Although I put my deposit, I'm secure, I'm tight, I'm going. Unless something untoward happens, I'll be going. But I'm pretty excited to announce that I'll be going to Iceland in another year or so. So real excited about that. I'd be interested in hearing if you have a bucket list place you want to go to, and if you've been able to work your bucket list places into your plans or your future plans or your budgeting and stuff like that. If there's a place you'd like to go to, let me know. If you got a bucket list place, maybe we'll talk about it here on the podcast, and how you're making that happen. It's not easy taking these trips. They require a lot of planning, and sometimes the financial part is difficult. I won't deny it. It's been a while since I've taken some trips, and it's because I've had to save the money. So it's, I'm lucky enough to be able to do that, but I'm certainly not in a position where I get first class accommodations or first class airfare or anything like that. I go as cheap as I can to make these trips happen, and you can do them pretty cheaply, but you've got to be able to be flexible on scheduling and shop around and find the best deal on where to go. Speaking of places to go, as you may have surmised if you follow me on social media, I am down in the desert for my usual spring trip to Arizona, where we have a very tiny little condo that we have down here. And, mostly I'm down here for baseball spring training. More on that in a minute. And then we kind of stay over for another month through the month of April and enjoy the desert and, entirely different environment down here. So a couple things about that. We started going to baseball spring training about 20 some odd years ago, when baseball spring training was partially held in Tucson and partially here in Phoenix and in different places in Florida. Here they call it the Cactus League. In Florida, it's the Grapefruit League, as you can imagine. And it used to be that spring training games were just that. They were practice games. You would go there and you'd pay $5 or $10 for a seat, and you wouldn't have to reserve them ahead of time. And you'd sit on a bleacher, and you'd have cheap popcorn and hot dogs and just watch a baseball game. Half the time you had no idea who was out there playing. These were all these prospective players who would come up. Most of them you would never see at the major leagues, but they'd be mixed in with major league players. I have pictures of Larry Walker, for example, sitting on the bench at a spring training game down in Tucson. Larry Walker, a Hall of Famer now, after his career with a number of teams, including mostly with the Rockies. So it has now become a major tourist industry. At least here in Arizona, it's probably the same in Florida, where they've built all these beautiful stadiums, some of which are almost the size of a regular major league stadium. They've all left Tucson and came up to the Phoenix area. There's still a bunch in Florida. It's split up. There's 15 teams here in the Phoenix area. There's 15 teams out of the 30 teams in the major leagues. There's 15 teams also in Florida. So this has become a major tourist industry, which is okay. I'm not going to fault the government officials who want to bring tourism. I think it's wonderful. It's a good idea. The problem is that now, between the stadiums and the prices they charge to go to games, has almost gotten to the point where it's ridiculously expensive. Let me give you an idea. When we started going to spring training games in Tucson, we would go for a week. We were both working. We'd get a week off. We'd pile into the car, drive 12 hours to Tucson, spend 5-6 days there, pile back in the car, drive 12 hours to come home to Colorado, go to work a day later. And we would in that week, we'd go to 5 games because the games were dirt cheap and you just go up to the window and pay for tickets and go in. Now, as it's become a major tourist draw, and I think, as much as I love baseball, I think it's become too big of an industry. Prices for tickets are outrageous. For example, at the Rockies training facility, there's a beautiful stadium, which they share with the Arizona Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks own one side of the complex, and the Rockies have the other side of the complex. Spring training tickets for a game with seats behind home plate are running almost $100 a seat, and I am not kidding when I tell you that. Parking is $10 to $20. The prices for the food and beverages are the same as if they were at Coors Field or at any major league ballpark. And some ballparks here are a little cheaper than the Brewers ballpark, which is completely on the other side of Phoenix, on the west side of Phoenix, in a section called Maryvale. It's a smaller ballpark, city-owned field as opposed to something privately owned or something like that. Much smaller ballpark, a pretty ballpark, a very nice ballpark. Tickets there are typically a lot cheaper than they are for the Rockies training facility. We have tickets coming up later this month for a game that the Giants are playing the Rockies at the Giants ballpark. Now it is on, I'll give you this, it is on St. Patrick's Day, which is a big draw. It is on a weekend. But tickets for us to go there, 2 seats with a $20, with all these fees added, there's like a $19 convenience fee, which I'm not sure who that $19 is convenience for. 2 tickets for 2 seats to that game are costing us $133. And if I didn't want to go see the Rockies play again, which I'm not sure why, because they perennially suck anyway, I wouldn't pay it, but it's ridiculously expensive. And we're not able to go to 5 or 6 games a week. We're lucky if the entire month of spring training, we get to go to 5 or 6 games for the entire month because they're so darned expensive. It's even gotten to the point now where we actually go to more college games. Arizona State University is here. They have an excellent baseball program. Grand Canyon University on the other side of town has a wonderful baseball program, a beautiful little field, and tickets are like $5. And you get to go see a pretty decent game. I mean, it's college level baseball. It's not professional baseball by any means, but it's a pretty good game. And here's the other problem with spring training, where you pay these outrageous prices for tickets and parking, is that half the time you're watching players you've never heard of, because they're in all different levels of the minor leagues, who you won't see play in the major league because they're going to be sent to the minors, which is fine. We're big fans of minor league baseball. Colorado Springs had minor league baseball for 50 years. you're paying these premium prices to watch people play who may only play a couple innings. And if any of the stars show up, they don't always play the whole game. They play a couple innings and they leave. And you're paying these big prices to pay to watch people you're not going to see anymore. You may not see ever again. They may get cut from the team for all you know. It's just outrageous what they're charging for ticket prices out here. It's just absolutely insane. And of course, with that, if you wanted to rent a car out here, good luck getting one. And B, you're going to pay outrageous. You're going to pay, a huge fee for a rental car if you fly out here. If you want to rent a hotel or an Airbnb or a VRBO, you're going to pay premium rates. And I don't blame anybody for that. That's supply and demand. But it's ridiculous that it's costing as much as it is to go to a spring training game, a game that doesn't matter in the long run. It's basically practice games. These games don't affect anybody's stats. They don't affect the standings of the team. They don't affect who ends up in the World Series or in the playoffs or anything like that. It's just pretty outrageous that that's what they're charging here. So we're going to fewer and fewer games, mostly because we just can't afford it. And B, I just have this philosophical opposition to paying full price for these kind of games. It's a little crazy. I can guarantee you that in the middle of August, if I wanted to go to a Rockies game, I could probably get pretty good seats for well under the $133 I'm paying for 2 seats to the Giants game. And by the way, those tickets for the Giants-Rockies game that cost me $133 are not behind home plate. They're not behind, the dugout. They are way out in right field someplace. They're not even that great of seats. They're going to be fine seats. It's a small ballpark. But they're not the kind of seats you think you'd be paying $133 for a pair of tickets for. It is just nuts. But we spend time down here because there's so much other things to do. Obviously, I'm hiking in the desert. I love hiking in the desert. The desert is gorgeous. Right now, this time of the year, the flowers are blooming. In a couple more weeks, the cactus are going to start blooming. It's an entirely different environment to hike in. On a hike that Cole and I did today, we encountered a pretty large Gila monster, which if you've never seen one of those, they're pretty scary. They are the only venomous lizard in North America. They're huge. They're colorful. Cole didn't understand that and wanted to go after it. And then later on the same hike, right near the trailhead, we encountered a rattlesnake that was sunning himself on the trail. Didn't bother anybody. We got pretty close to it before we realized what it was. I think Cole was within inches of stepping on it. It never reacted. It just sat there and kind of looked at it. So we've encountered a rattlesnake. We encountered a Gila monster, which you rarely ever see those. There's a lot of the little lizards. And the flowers are blooming here. They're entirely different flowers than you see in Colorado or in the mountains. It's just an entirely different thing. So we love being down here in the desert. Now, by the end of April, when we come home, it's going to be way too hot to be down here. By the end of April, temperatures are hitting the 90s, approaching 100 degrees. Cold's limit is about 75 or 80, depending. And it's just time to come home, and then we don't come back down here to the fall. But we love being down here. It is fun. A couple of things about hiking into the desert. One of the things I've noticed is the trail etiquette of other people. Now, I'm going to say things that are not going to make some people happy. But I've noticed that there's definitely a different mentality towards hiking and cycling down here. And there's plenty of people hiking and plenty of people cycling. One of the things that I've noticed is that outdoor people, whether they're hiking or cycling or whatever, tend to be much more respectful of other users while they're down here, and also tend to be much more aware of trail etiquette. I've had far fewer bad encounters with cyclists than I have in other places here. They tend to not be zooming down the trails, and they tend to be very good about announcing themselves, and they know who yields who. I did have an encounter the other day with somebody who was not aware of that and got me a little angry. The hikers tend to be a little better at playing by the rules. You don't see people going off trail as much. Now, some of that is they're worried about being bit by rattlesnakes. Maybe that's what keeps them on the trail. You see far fewer people hiking off trail where it's posted that you can't go off trail. And you almost never see anybody with their dog off leash. People here are really good about keeping their dogs on leash. Maybe something to do with, worry about their dog getting bit by a rattlesnake. But generally people here seem to be a little better about playing by the rules than they are in Colorado Springs. Now, before you write me, send me emails, I know we're painting with a very broad brush here. Most of the people I see play by the rules at home in Colorado, and I'm not picking on cyclists or hikers. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Neither group holds the moral high ground in behavior. They all have bad actors. So I'm not trying to say that the cyclists are bad or the hikers are bad or anything along those lines. So if you want to write me an email, which you're welcome to, at least remember that I said that I'm painting with a very broad brush here. I'm speaking in broad generalities, but in general, and I've been coming down here long enough and spend enough time down here and spend enough time on different trails that there seems to be that. That being said, enforcement seems to be a little bit more stringent down here. Park rangers actually have some authority, and while I would say that they are very friendly and they're not out here to push people around or make anybody's life miserable, I think if you're doing something wrong and a park ranger catches you, you're going to be told what's what. And you're going to be pointed out that there's an error in your ways, and it'll probably be in your best interest to play by the rules and be a good user and be a courteous user and to understand trail etiquette. So, that being said, I've just noticed that as a difference down here. Speaking of wildflowers, I've been asked if we'll have a poppy super bloom this year. The answer to that is no. We will have plenty of poppies to see, but if you remember pictures I took last year in 2023 of the poppies, it was an incredible super bloom. They lasted weeks. They blanketed acres and acres and acres, square miles in some places of land. We're not going to see that this year. Interesting thing about the poppies, not only do they need plenty of water, but the water has to be at the right time. So if the rain comes too early or too late, it doesn't help the poppies. And so apparently this past winter, there was plenty of moisture. It wasn't at the right time. And this is far over my head and my ability to understand it. They are not going to be the super bloom. Now, I've seen plenty of poppies. I've been taking pictures. If you follow my social media so far, you've seen those pictures. There'll be more to come. I'm hoping the cactuses bloom this year. Cactuses need moisture, but they also need heat. Last year, the spring here was very cool, and the cactus didn't bloom till very late. But this year, it's pretty warm. We've had days in the 70s and 80s so far, so if they warm up, I think we'll see some cactus blossoms, and there's a lot of different varieties of cactus, plenty to see out here. Anyway, if you've never come down here and gone hiking, I highly recommend you do it. Spend some time down in the Phoenix area, the desert, and try to go hiking. My advice would also be come down here in the fall. The desert's still beautiful. You might be after the flowers bloom. The desert's still beautiful, very colorful, very warm. And the crowds seem to be less here in the fall than they are obviously in the spring, where everybody's got cabin fever and there's spring break and spring training baseball and everybody wants to be out here, and then you're fighting with a bazillion other people. Come down here in the fall. It's a beautiful time to be down here. And they're all fall colors here. They just happen to happen in November and December, not September and October like we see at home. A couple other things to talk about here real quickly. The Blodgett Open Space Master and Management Plan process is coming to an end. By the time you hear this, or shortly after you hear this, depending on how early you get up on Wednesday morning, the TOPS working committee of which I chair will be getting a presentation on the final draft of the Blodgett Open Space Master Plan. The presentation will occur the day you're hearing this on Wednesday with the TOPS working committee, and then next Thursday with the Park Advisory Board. And then what happens is in April, the TOPS working committee gets it again, and then we actually vote whether to recommend implementing the plan, and then the following week the Park Advisory Board does the same thing. So a lot of plan in there. There has been a tremendous amount of feedback on it. Not everybody is happy with it. I don't expect everybody to be happy with everything. Some people think that one group is being the interest of one group are being more heavily weighted than the interest of another group. Some people concerned about traffic in their neighborhood, about visitors in their neighborhood. I'll have plenty to say on that, but I'm not going to say anything right now because I haven't seen the presentation yet. We're recording this a couple of days ahead of time. But I will say this, parks are for everybody, and they're for everybody to use, and we spend a lot of tax money buying these lands, and they're not there to become neighborhood parks. They're there to become regional parks and for people to use. And I think that the Parks Department has done a tremendous job of reaching out to the public to get input. As a matter of fact, they even delayed this plan coming out by a whole month so they can get more public input and talk to people more. So there's plenty going on. But this should be wrapping up, and then from there, then the master plan, which develops the park and builds trails and amenities and stuff, that goes into effect, and that happens over time because it's very much, as you can imagine, fund dependent. If there's money, they do it. If there's not money, they have to wait till they do it. A lot of stuff going on there. On top of that, we're just now starting the master planning process for Fisher's Canyon open space, which is the land on the east face of Cheyenne Mountain that's kind of wedged between the Cheyenne Mountain Zoo and Cheyenne Mountain State Park, a big swath of land up on the hill that the city bought through the TOPS program. That plan is starting up. They're taking a survey right now. I've linked to that in a couple of my newsletters, which if you haven't, sign up for my newsletter. So there's a lot going on there. That's going to be a whole nother thing. That's going to be a little different because it's not a park or an open space that's already open like Blodgett has been. And, Blodgett's been added on, which is why that there's a new master plan going on for that. It's completely starting off fresh. There's nothing there right now. So that is in the process right now, or that's starting up right now. So that's going to be going on, and watch out for more on the Fisher's Canyon open space. I will tell you that Fisher's Canyon has tremendous potential. Not only will it allow access to the top of Cheyenne Mountain other than on the Dixon Trail, but it will finally connect to the west side of Cheyenne Mountain. You'll actually be able to go up one side and down the other on established trails. The Chamberlain Trail, which goes from Blodgett open space to Cheyenne Mountain State Park. This is another key section of it that'll be built. It's going to be pretty interesting to see that happen. It's starting now. It's going to take a while. I will be off the TOPS working committee because I'm term limited out before this is done. So other people there, and I'm not even part of the process officially other than as a private citizen because I will be leaving the committee pretty soon. So lots going on there. So I encourage you to keep an eye out for that. I will put links in the show notes for the Fisher's Canyon Open Space Master Plan survey that's going on right now. One last thing, and this you may find interesting, is the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. And Colorado Parks and Wildlife is managed by or overseen by a commission, which is different than like an advisory board. A commission actually has rule-making, policy-setting authority. And in Colorado, there's the Colorado Parks and Wildlife Commission. I believe it's 11 members. I think we've talked about this before on the podcast. So to get on the commission, you have to be nominated, basically appointed by the governor, but you must go through an approval, a confirmation process at the state Senate. Sort of like if you watched confirmation hearing for the U.S. Supreme Court. The president makes a nomination. They have to go through a confirmation process before they get on there. In Colorado, the governor appoints people to this commission and many others. There's a whole section on the state website about commissions and boards. So what has happened is that during the time recently when the Senate was not in session, and they're not in session 12 months out of the year, they're in session for so many months and they go home and then they come back the next session. The governor appointed 3 people to the CPW commission. Still have to be confirmed, and they can work on the commission while they're waiting to be confirmed, but they still have to be confirmed. So 3 of those folks came up, 3 of those people who were put on the commission by the governor came up for confirmation hearings in the last week, and 2 of them were not recommended for confirmation by the Senate. This is a Senate subcommittee, Agricultural and Recreation. So their names are still go to the full Senate, but out of the 3 of them, 2 of them were not nominated or not recommended for confirmation. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. Typically, commission nominations and appointments are unnoticed by the public. This is pretty interesting. So here's what's happening, is that on the CPW commission, commissioners are designated to represent certain aspects of what CPW does. So many people have to be sports people, which means they're hunters and fishermen. Some people have to represent agriculture. Some people have to represent parks and outdoor recreation. Some people are considered at large. They don't represent anything particular. And also a certain number of them have to be from the western slope, the western side of the Continental Divide. And this makes sure that all interests are represented and all the populations represented, because obviously if most of the population's on the Front Range between Boulder and Colorado Springs, that would, easily you could see where that would take up the bulk of the commission membership. So they make sure they spread it out. All of that's good. The issue has become, and some groups and some people have raised this as a concern, that when you look at the biographies of the people who are on the commission, that it does not appear that they represent all aspects of the commission's purview, CPW's purview. And in reality, and my concern has been that when I look at the commissioners who are designated for outdoor recreation, they don't have a strong outdoor recreation or parks background, in my opinion. And I'm not saying these aren't fine people. I'm not saying they're wonderful people. I don't know them. I'm not saying anything about them personally. I'm just saying that when you look at their bios, it doesn't seem that they represent parks. And when you look at CPW as a whole, CPW divides the state in 4 regions. They're managed by a regional manager. All 4 regional managers of Colorado Parks and Wildlife all have a wildlife background. They were all wildlife managers, which are game wardens in any other place. Again, not saying they're not great people. The regional manager for the Southeast region that Colorado Springs falls in, I've known for years. Great guy. Definitely has the interest of parks at heart. But on paper, it does not appear that way. On paper, it appears that the CPW Commission is heavily weighted towards wildlife. And in the management of CPW, it appears it's heavily weighted towards wildlife. And that is people on the park side of things very concerned. I know some groups have written letters to the state Senate saying we're not happy with the way this is set up. So I think some of that is driving what's happening with some of these CPW Commission members not being recommended for confirmation. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. It's going to be, the governor makes these appointments, makes these nominations. So it's up to the governor if these folks end up not being confirmed by the commission. And I guess it's not the first time nominees have not been confirmed by the Senate and they end up having to leave the commission or they never get on. Who the governor is going to move forward with then, if he's going to bring in people who are more parks oriented. And this is really interesting too, because Governor Polis has been very much pro parks. He has pushed to create new parks. He pushed to keep Colorado Wild Pass, which I think is a wonderful thing. $29 added to your vehicle registration. You can go to parks all the time, full all year, as often as you want. I think that's all great. But for somebody who's been very heavily parks oriented, that is, nominees to the CPW Commission do not appear to be very much parks oriented. Let's take a look at the new director of CPW, who's been there for a while. Again, does not come from a parks background. The previous director did not come from a parks background. The director before that director did not come from a parks background. So it seems that CPW seems to be heavily weighted towards the wildlife side of things. Again, I'm not saying that these are bad people. I'm not saying they don't have parks at heart. I'm not saying they're not looking out for the best interest of parks, although there's a lot of people who don't think they are. I may or may not agree with that, but it just seems that the CPW Commission, was supposed to be parks and wildlife, seems to be very heavily weighted towards wildlife. So that has got some people concerned, and that may be what drove some of the Senate subcommittee to not recommend 2 of the 3 members for confirmation, one of which was set to represent parks and trails, that kind of thing. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out in the coming weeks. In any case, lots of things going on. I hope you're enjoying the spring and winter winding down. We have a time change coming up that will not affect me while I'm down here in Arizona, because Arizona does not do daylight savings time. So for several months out of the year, Arizona's, for all intents and purposes, on Pacific time. But right now we're on the same time zone. Anyway, all that stuff notwithstanding. One more thing. In April, there's going to be a huge solar eclipse that'll be visible over North America. Unfortunately, you will have to be basically somewhere in a line from the Gulf Coast to Maine to see it. From Texas to Maine, we're barely going to see it here. But a lot of people are making plans and reservations and arrangements to go to the East Coast or somewhere out east to see it because it'll be the last total solar eclipse that'll be visible over North America for a good 20 years. So if you don't want to wait 20 years to see the next one, or if you're somebody like me getting old and not sure you're going to be around 20 years from now, you may want to try to find your way over to Texas or New York or Pennsylvania or Kentucky or someplace out that way to see this full solar eclipse. It promises to be spectacular. I hope that for people who are I'm not planning on going out there, but I'm hoping for people who are planning on going out there in April that, we don't have a day when there's bad weather and nobody gets to see anything. That would be terrible. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. Hopefully we'll see Wild Westendorf back here pretty soon. We have a couple more interviews in the works, so we'll have some more interviews coming up. And with that, we'll say thanks for listening to the Outdoors Hiking Bob podcast. We'll talk to you next time. Hey everybody, before you go, and thanks for listening to my podcast, don't forget to check out Stevie and Will on Chronology's Functional Wellness podcast. You can tune in for tips on slow aging, functional wellness, and healing through food, movement, and a healthy lifestyle. Check it out here at studio809podcast.com.